Welcome to the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast with best-selling author Fawn Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Come here weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network.
Hi, I'm Fawn Germer.
And I'm Michelle Brigman.
And this is Hard-Won Wisdom. Our guest today had a huge impact on me. And I should tell you that the first sentence in the first chapter of my first book belonged to Jody Williams. Jody won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1997 for the landmines campaign. And she has been on a mission to change the world from before that and ever since. But I asked her this question, which was, what separates an ordinary woman from an extraordinary woman? And she didn't even flinch. She said, the belief that she's ordinary. And that changed a lot in my perspective, not just on how I saw myself, but how I saw other women. And I guess everyone, but particularly with women, because we do so much to limit ourselves and we don't realize how much power we have within ourselves. And so it is such an honor today to share this incredibly powerful woman who did change the world, who has this great story of what she did to win the Nobel Peace Prize, but how she continued on ever since with the Nobel Women's Initiative, with human rights, with everything so that she can change the world. It does matter that she was here. So it's our pleasure to share with you Jody Williams. Hey.
Hey, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again.
Uh-huh.
So we need to start with that story, which is how you emerged from ordinary to extraordinary. And my favorite part of it begins in a dentist's office.
But you know something? I still think I'm ordinary. It's just with a whole bunch of people around the world working in concert for the greater good that we change the world. You know, I don't think very often in terms of me, it's we.
Well, you did a lot of me to make that treaty get signed. Right. But we're getting to that.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying? I really believe in the we, not the me. And that's part of helping people feel empowered. But anyway, the dentist's office, my first job out of university, because I had changed my major 8 million times and couldn't do anything, right, I was a surgical assistant to an oral surgeon, and I fainted 7 times the first day. Literally. And he did not fire me. God knows. He must have been desperate.
But at that point, you thought you might need another career path?
Well, I was hoping that the dentist's office was just, until I figured out what I was going to do, And that was still a long journey. But, I believe that everything we do, even being the dental assistant, in some way contributes to who we are and how we decide to proceed in life. And, I just thought, if I'm going to be on this planet, I really want to try to do something to make it better for everybody. You never know if you're going to, but that's just always what's motivated me.
So the turning point was?
Well, Vietnam, but that was before the dentist. I mean, Vietnam, the war and the protests and all that are what totally changed my view of the United States and began to empower me to believe that I had a role to play in helping to shape the future of this country. Because I was particularly disturbed by its extremely militaristic, interventionist history. And that trips me out that people still believe that the United States is a peace-loving country. Look at how long we've been in Afghanistan, for God's sake, just insane.
So, but what was it that made you start taking the action that led to such big accomplishments?
As I said, first Vietnam, and then about a decade later, the United States started meddling in Central America. El Salvador and Nicaragua primarily were where I was involved. And it was, I was in Washington at the time, and I was walking to get on the subway to go home to Virginia. And the scruffy individual stuffed a brochure at me, and I would have thrown it away, but I was too embarrassed. You know what I mean? So I shoved it in my pocket. And then when I got on the subway, I just looked at it, and it said El Salvador, another Vietnam, with a question mark. If it had just said, learn about El Salvador in the US, I would have thrown it away. But it was a juxtaposition of Vietnam and El Salvador. And I'm thinking, wait, didn't we learn anything from Vietnam? And it announced a church basement meeting in a week's time to hear a guy from El Salvador talk about what the US government was doing there. And I went, miraculously. I hate church basements. I'm an introvert. It was a week later, which stunned me. Because usually, you get inspired, and then a week later, you got other stuff to do. Wash your hair, really important things. But I went, and I was so moved by what he had to say. And I got so full of righteous indignation, which to me is a little different from anger. Righteous indignation is when you can't tolerate the injustice of what you're hearing. And so I started volunteering at the organization, and I never stopped. No, I mean, obviously I stopped volunteering there, but my understanding of activism and my role as an activist kept growing and growing and growing. And here I am 800 million years later, still an activist.
So Jody, that was a big moment where you went into something much bigger. If you were to reflect back on your life, do you think back to early signs where you found this courage within yourself to stand up and be a lone voice and protect someone else? Did it start even earlier than that?
Yep. My oldest brother was born deaf, not hard of hearing, he was stone deaf. And our next door neighbors in Poultney, Vermont, a thriving metropolis of 1,200 people, were nasty brothers, Billy and Bobby. And they got a real charge out of making fun of him and terrifying him. Because I don't know if you know any deaf people, but the sounds that some make are quite remarkable. So they were mean to him, and, I kept trying to defend him. He was 3 years older than I was. So I don't know, I was 5. You know what I mean? But at that age, thinking that's my brother, I can, keep him safe. And then one day in 4th grade, we were at recess, and we were playing kickball. Mm-hmm. I don't know if y'all played.
Oh yes,
kickball.
Oh yes, it's still a thing.
David, who was the hot stud of 4th grade, seriously blonde hair, blue eyes. He could do everything. He was smart. We had a new kid who moved to town, and, 3 or 4 months into the school year, which is always horrible. And his name was Michael, and he was a geek. He had glasses like this, and he just couldn't kick a ball to save his life. And David was mean to him. And in our game, it was a circle, and I stood there for a few minutes, all of us, right, watching David berate, belittle, and humiliate this complete geek. And for some reason, it just flashed through my mind that, if I don't do anything, I'm as bad as he is. And what is it, and this I thought about later, but 20 kids are standing there letting this person humiliate another person because he can't. And I was shaking, of course, inside, outside. I wanted to throw up, to be quite honest, but I stepped into the circle and said, David, why are you doing this? You're doing it because you can, because you're bigger, et cetera, et cetera. And he backed down, which stunned me. And he invited Michael to play. And once you do it and you see that it matters, not that you saved anybody or anything like that, but that it helped somebody else, it's really hard not to keep doing it.
That positive consequence. Yeah.
I would feel horrible if I knew something was unjust and I just sat there.
Now
especially.
you record it with your mobile phone and you post it on social media, and that's your way of contributing. That's what you see people do. And,
Yes,
it's
it
so,
does not impress me, I have to say.
Don't you think that that's helpful too? And like when you have the uncomfortable conversations you have to have, whether you're doing what you do or in business, and you have to confront, well, the more you do it, the easier it gets.
Yep. It's totally so. And I hope that little experience in fourth grade helped the other kids understand that you don't have to remain silent in the face of bullying or nastiness or whatever. You have power, and you either diminish your own power by doing nothing, or you make a choice to stand up and try to help. To me, it's pretty easy. It's A or B, And if you don't help, you're complicit. And I'm very hard line about that. If you do nothing, you're as bad as the person who's being evil.
but that's a great lead in, because I think, people are going to be listening and they see you, Jody, as someone, right? You have made such an incredible impact on the world, and they're in their little circle, right? They're in their little circle of influence. What advice would you give them in regards to taking a stand and making a difference? And not everybody's going to be the Jody Williams, right?
But God, I hope not. When I speak with young people and they, how can I be like you? And I'm like, please don't be like me. Be better than me.
I love that.
You have so much access to information and things that, I didn't and kids my age didn't. But look at what you can do with, not taking a film and posting it, but that's technology that is a tool for you to be a better activist, I honestly do not believe it matters what you take a stand on. It matters, though, that you do take a stand. And the other part of that is critical to me is that you're doing it for everybody. You're doing it to make the world a better place for everybody, even people you do not like. Because if you're doing it only for your friends or your political party or your church group or whatever, it doesn't have the same kind of consequence. If I want the world to be better for everybody, it's because that indicates that I, as a human being, recognize your humanity. Mm-hmm. I, as a human being, recognize that we both have the right to live in a decent world with good education, all the stuff we talk about. And I am willing to work in a way that makes the world that way for you and me, even if we disagree on things. Yeah. But if it's only for you and me because you're my buddy, it doesn't excite me particularly.
Yeah. So how did that meeting in the basement talk about the journey to the Nobel Peace Prize? Like
the Salvador? Well, it was this young man, and his father was a murderous colonel in the Salvadoran military. And Mario and his father split because Mario was in the political opposition. And just listening to his story, fired me up. And then at the end of the church basement event, he said, if anybody wants to volunteer for this organization that works on El Salvador, please, write your name and phone number on this piece of paper. And I did. And I started out as a volunteer. I had no understanding or intention of my life turning out the way it was. I was a full-time teacher. But I thought, I can do this. I had, I can give a few hours a week to work on this issue that, at this point seems really important to me. And if I don't like it, I'll just stop. Right? It was of my own choice. But as I kept learning and about the situation and about, how to work together with people to bring about change, I didn't look back, I guess, kind of. And here I am, a million years later. But so that's what I say to most people, you don't have to change your entire life. And I didn't. I just started a few hours a week volunteering. And if even that's too much, start, once every 2 weeks or something for an hour and see if it works for you. See if the people you're working with, if it feels right, if what they're talking about feels right. And if it doesn't, leave, find a different organization working on whatever that thing is that grabs you so much you worry about it. But worrying about something without taking action to change it is completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter. I could worry and worry and worry and worry forever about weapons of war and sexism and racism. And if I did nothing, all that worrying, all it would do would be give me an ulcer, and it wouldn't make a damn bit of difference in the world.
That's important what you just said, that worry without action is useless. But a lot of people do feel a little helpless these days because there's been a war on the truth, and they don't know how to be effective. And I want to ask you about that, but also hear the rest of the story of how you won the Nobel. But so how do people find that power?
Again, it's by working with other people. When I started at the Salvador Solidarity Group, I didn't know anything. I had never, other than, a few college protests against Vietnam, I hadn't been an activist. And by volunteering, I did actions with them. I'd stand on the street corners and hand out those pamphlets that, I wanted to throw away myself. And then I learned how to write about the situation in their newsletter. And slowly I began to acquire the skills of what it is to be an activist. You don't just fully blown jump out of the womb as an activist necessarily. It's a learning process. And hopefully, for me, if I'm learning something both about the situation and new skills, it's like, wow, how awesome is that? And I really loved what I was doing, and I guess I never stopped. In different ways, obviously.
After all of that, do you feel like you're more of an optimist or a pessimist of the status of the world and your ability to change it?
Well, because we did change it, I believe in change. But I guess that I'm an optimistic pessimist, really.
So
I don't have a lot of faith in human beings as a group.
I don't even know how to start with that.
Yeah. Albert Schweitzer, I think he won the Nobel.
Right.
And it was said about him, he loved the idea of humanity, but he didn't like human beings. That's kind of how I feel in my worst days, Oh,
thank God for our dogs.
Yeah, really. And our cats.
Yeah.
People think about the activism around peace. And I think we all make this assumption that it's, the big state level peace, right? How do you make the world more peaceful? You've spoken a lot about this idea called sustainable peace.
Mm-hmm.
Would you share a little bit about what that means? Because it feels so much more, this feels very personal to me when I hear you share this idea.
Sure. I think when most people think about peace, they're just thinking about the absence of war. That to me is not sustainable peace. That is the mere bottom line upon which you can build sustainable peace. And sustainable peace is when the nation state's resources are spent for the good of the human beings who live in that state and make everybody more secure in their housing, in their education, in their access to medical care, in having decent work that pays them enough so they can live with dignity. That is what makes people secure. That's what sustains, if there ever would be a sustainable peace, right? If most of my needs are taken care of, and in a way where I'm participating and have dignity in what I'm doing, I have less desire to go and blow somebody up. But security and peace in our world is the security of the nation state and, atomic bombs and all of this stuff. And I would bet my bottom dollar that in the world, the pandemic world we've been living through, very few people are thinking or even have thought or are thinking, oh my God, I hope we get another atomic bomb because it'll make me feel so much more safe. They're thinking, where's my vaccine? Where's my medical care? Where do I go? Why do my children go to such horrible schools? Take 60, listen to this, 60% of our national budget goes to the military. 60. 3% goes to schools. 3% go to medical care. I mean, what does that say about this country? 60%.
Fear.
Yeah.
We thrive on fear.
Yeah. And violence.
Mm-hmm.
And
But think if, even if 90% of that 60% went to make sure that every school in this country was of equal value or whatever, not like if I'm in Beverly Hills, I'm going to get a good education, but if I'm in a slum in Detroit, I will not have education worthy of the name.
Yeah.
I will not learn how to be self-sufficient. I will not learn how to feel empowered in the world, But if we put our money into education, my God, imagine the country.
right.
Instead of yet another freaking bomb.
You've picked your causes carefully, and or do they pick you? Like with the landmines, how did you get to that? And then
I don't know what people are doing in my house. Well, I do. Since we're selling the house, we're having some things done to make it ready for the market. Anyway, excuse that noise if you heard it.
okay, so
Start back with your question.
okay. I want to hear how you got into the landmines issue and then how that progressed, because the story of you, really, that was a single-handed thing that you pulled off with that treaty. We didn't have a secretary.
We did it.
I know, but there was a lot of you in that we.
Yeah, because I was the only staff person in the beginning, but I believe fundamentally in coalition work.
And wait, how many countries did you get to sign that treaty?
Well, I think now we're up to 164. It's pretty amazing.
Without a secretary.
Oh yeah, I still don't have a secretary.
But how did you do this? Because that tells people how they can, slay the dragon themselves.
Well, when I was invited by two men, one with the Vietnam Vets of America Foundation, and the other a German who ran a humanitarian relief medical organization that I worked with in Central America. They asked if I thought I could create a campaign of NGOs, civil society organizations, that could pressure governments into a treaty. I was clueless if we could. I'd never thought about landmines, even though I'd worked in Central America. But I thought, there are millions of landmines in the world. There are millions of landmines in the ground. People are getting blown up every day. Everybody who gets blown up after the end of the war, is a civilian. So that is like generations after a war ends, people are still being killed by the weapons of an ancient war. That's insane. So I thought, okay, probably we won't get a treaty, in maybe not even in my lifetime, but if we are able to come together in some way and help victims around the world, how awesome is that? Right. And I was sick of Central America by then. I'd done 11 years and I wanted something where I'd learn new things, et cetera. And I decided it would be a good thing to try to do. So I said yes. And then to me, it was a very logical next move. You start talking to other NGOs that have something in some way or another to do with landmines, and you invite them to be part of a campaign, and it worked.
But it wasn't like there was some big Google list of click here to get your treaty signed. I mean, it's just
No, we used a fax machine. I used a fax machine, and it was the old kind with the thermal paper.
yes.
So if you didn't put the fax in, a folder and a file cabinet or something, and the sun hit it, the fax would disappear.
Right. I
So
remember.
I spent countless hours faxing organizations all around the world.
Jody, in that process, I think, how did you influence, like how much of it was based on the facts and data, which I'm assuming you probably didn't have a ton of at that time, as well as the emotional, this is the right thing? Because I think a lot of times, if I apply it a little bit to business, right, you have leaders that are trying to drive change, influence their, their C-suite, and they're bringing forward an argument and they can't quite get it to the yes, right? They can't get it over the line. What did you find was effective for you? Because these were huge changes you were driving.
Mm-hmm. Well, as the campaign grew, we had organizations that worked on all the aspects of the problem of landmines, right? We had organizations of mine clearance experts. They were mostly former military, but who saw the chaos of landmines and formed non-governmental organizations to do mine clearance. So they knew that aspect of our problem. We had other organizations that, like Handicap International out of France, that worked with the mine victims, providing prosthetic limbs. So they knew, pretty much everything you needed to know about that aspect of the problem. We had other organizations like Human Rights Watch that had done some work on the impact of landmines compared to their military value, because that balance is part of what allows you to fight for a banning of a weapon. Human Rights Watch and Physicians for Human Rights of the US had just put out a book called The Coward's War, Landmines in Cambodia. And it was so powerful, talking about, these little weapons designed on purpose to maim people. And the war ends and there are millions of landmines in the ground, and look at Cambodia. It is a coward's war to put weapons in the ground and walk away at the end of a war, knowing full well that kids, grandmothers, mothers, etc., are going to be blown up. And that book really moved the soul of many people. And there was also some sort of serendipity, because landmines became very interesting to journalists around the world, because nobody really recognized the problem until the collapse of the Soviet Union and all of the proxy wars that were being fought in other countries between the US and the USSR ended, and people found just jillions of landmines that had been used. So I didn't have to be the emotive one, I could be how I am, which is hard. And,
which is what? I didn't hear that.
I was a hard ass.
Okay, you're a hard ass.
Still am. And, it was the Handicap Internationals that could talk convincingly about the survivors and then, the rough and tough ex-military who could talk about demining. And one of the best things we did in our campaign was let everybody be who they were and how they were, as long as we were all talking about, the goal of banning anti-personnel landmines.
Which is the same in leadership. That's leadership 101.
Yep.
To me. And the other thing, as the campaign grew, I totally believed, and I do today in all my work, that if I keep the most important information for myself, that makes me invaluable. And if I were to get hit by a bus, who else would be able to easily step in and take my place? If I make sure everybody I'm working with has most of the information, then we're on an equal footing and we're equally empowered to move forward together. To me, that's like 1 and 1 is 2. If people who tend to keep the information want the power.
How much of what you've done is ego driven and how much of it is purpose? And
it's not that I'm ego free, for God's sake. I think you'd have to be in a coma. But I do it because I believe it will help people. I mean, I really think in the campaign, if it had been ego driven, I would have kept most of the information. So I would be the most powerful, so that I would be the only one that everybody wanted to talk to. I could care less. I didn't care about talking to the media. Other people enjoyed it and their organizations wanted the recognition. I could care less. I just wanted to see, it move forward, it grow, and it have an impact. I think, if I had an ego, I'd worry about what people think about me. If I had that kind of ego, I would, if I were with political people, I'd want to be this way so they'd think I was cool and knew what I was talking about. And if I were with military, I'd want to be this way. And I'm the same with everybody, whether they like it or not. I mean, prime ministers, and I don't care who you are. We all die and we turn to dust, We all go to the bathroom the same way. We all need to take a shower. What makes you more important than me, or me more important than you? We're just people.
we need to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to go pick up from there with the idea of credit. So one break, we'll be right back.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Fawn.
Hey, Michelle.
Okay, we have all these amazing women that are sharing their stories on this podcast, but what do we do now so it is not a bunch of talk and no action?
Well, that's the easy part. Everybody just head over to the Women's Leadership Network at womensleadershipnetwork.com. And wowza, this is the ultimate mastermind and masterclass for career women. So if you're looking for coaching and inspiration from some of the most accomplished and influential women of our times, and you don't want to pay $1 million for it, you've found your tribe.
All right, so what do we get?
Coaching, courses, community, and connection.
What's that website again, Fawn?
Well, that's the easy part. womensleadershipnetwork.com.
Okay, so Jody, now I want to ask you something, because there is a famous line that I think it was Truman who said, there's no limit to what you can accomplish if you're willing to give up the credit.
Mm-hmm.
Can you muse on that a little bit?
Well, I'll talk about it in a different way. As I said, everybody in the campaign brought to the campaign their particular talent. Some people were just great at, one-line zingers to harass governments who weren't doing the right thing. Others could put together, photo galleries of survivors and stuff that were outstanding. And we were thrilled that everybody had the space so that they could fill their space to the best of their ability. And so in the first years of the campaign, right up until the treaty and the Nobel, journalists who had half a brain were interested in talking with the people whose work addressed the questions they had. For example, if I want to know about taking mines out of the ground, I don't talk to Jody Williams. I talk to Ray McGrath of Mines Advisory Group, right? Or if I want to know about prosthetics, I don't talk to Jody Williams. I talk to Sylvie Brigol out of Handicap International. So it was, everybody had the space to also talk about what they did, their organization did, why they cared. And then the Nobel, and the only person they wanted to talk to was me. And I was livid. I would get so angry, because before, we're a campaign of thousands of people. All I did was, be the spider in the middle, making sure everybody was doing what they said they'd do. Um, it was a very hard transition for me. I liked it better when everybody was seen as part of this amazing effort, right? And for the first 5 years of the Nobel, I had a very hard time with it as an individual. I had no doubt that we deserved the Nobel Peace Prize for that campaign. We, really filled the terms of Alfred Nobel's will better than many who had received it, to be quite honest. And then, I don't know, 5 years later, maybe, I had grown more used to it. But then when we formed the Nobel Women's Initiative and women came together to use the influence and access afforded us by the prize to spotlight the women's work in zones of conflict, about how they struggle in conflict, trying to keep their families alive, keep their communities alive. In essence, trying to create sustainable peace in the midst of war. I just love having the Peace Prize now because I feel like I'm sharing it with the women of the world. It's awesome.
Well, it's amazing too how you as women came together, recognizing that you did have this platform, that you could elevate voices that maybe weren't heard before. I mean, how did it even come together? Like,
just Shirin Ebadi from Iran, she received the Nobel in, just give me a minute here. I think 2002. We were in Nairobi, Kenya for another reason, and we were talking, and she said, look how many women are alive today with the Nobel Prize. Because I think by now we're only about 19 women in the entire 100 some odd year history of that damn thing. And there have been 90 men. There has never been a Nobel Men's Initiative or anything approximating it.
Because they didn't need one, right?
It's all about too much ego involvement there. But
women like that social, help each other. We're the nurturers at heart. So this makes sense.
Shirin said, shouldn't we do something together? And I said, sounds pretty good. And I knew the others because I had seniority, because I'd been a Nobel longer. So I talked with everybody and we thought it was a useful thing. And so we did it. Just that, again, going back to the Nobel isn't about us. It's about work that has been done and how can we use it to continue, doing work. The responsibility of the prize for some of us, some don't care, but for us in the Nobel Women's Initiative, there's a huge responsibility of having that thing.
Yeah.
You don't want to be like the footnote. Jody Williams received the Nobel in 1997. We never heard from her again. The footnote Nobel. Basked in the
glory of it all, right? Keep making change. I'm sure you're just getting started. I know that, as I'm sitting here just listening to your story, and thank you so much for sharing with us a few things that really have hit me, is it's about being honest and listening to that inner voice and what it's calling you to, and being willing to just be curious and step into it and say yes. That's the thing, I think, Jody, as you go back in the history of it, you just kept saying yes as long as it felt right? And then using that influence and information and the assets around you to pull people together to drive something really meaningful. And I think you said a few things that stood out. Was, how you see yourself matters, and that each of us has a tremendous amount of power to offer the world. And that I like the collective we can do great things, and to just really think about, are you working together towards something that is really going to shift on a greater scale and not just a small circle? And the importance of recognizing people's strengths, leveraging them, and really nurturing people so they can perform at their very best, and respecting those differences to come together and frankly work some magic. Those were just a few of the things that just really, really stood out to me today as you shared your story. And I think about things that I can take with me and our listeners can take with them as they, step into tomorrow. And I really thank you for everything you do and everything that you've done to really make this world a better place. You truly are a gift.
No kidding.
My mother would say, let me tell you some things about her.
Yeah. And those things are the things that we love about you the most.
Thank
you. And Michelle, the way you wrap that up, I love that.
Oh, thank you. I was just listening. Listening and learning.
Likewise.
Careful, Michelle. She's going to put you to work.
Well, that's what I love about these is I think if I'm just being honest, I sit and I listen to so many women that have these great ideas and they just immediately opt out. They don't even try. And so just having the encouragement, someone to believe in you that says, why not? Like, just see where it goes. You don't have to have all the answers.
Right.
You didn't go into this.
I'll figure them out as I go along.
Yes. You didn't start here going, hey, I'm going to win this Nobel Peace Prize. I'm going to be a recipient.
I didn't even know what it was, to be honest.
No way.
I was clueless when I was a kid, for sure.
But you just said, I'm curious. And why not go to that meeting and look at where that next door led? It's amazing.